If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what is your go-to eerie, creepy / unexplained story? This can be anything from a paranormal encounter, otherworldly things, glitch in the Matrix, or even aliens. About 15 years ago, played with a Ouija board with 2 friends. I felt I was just playing along and didn't take it seriously. So I left, walked home, and went to sleep. That night, I had a dream like I've never experienced before. This demon thing dressed in plain clothes paralyzed me and my vision went blurry and I fell over. In my dream, I woke up and was in the same state. I couldn't move and I couldn't see straight. This lasted for a good 30 seconds. I know there's a name for dreams like that, but I have never had a dream like that before or after that night. Now, to preface, my dad has always had a foot in the spiritual world, with demonic and ghostly experiences. One such story was that, when my grandfather died, my dad woke up in the middle of the night and saw him floating outside of the window. My dad called home and found that my grandfather had only passed away a half hour ago. My dad was in the US at the time, while the rest of his family was in China. But, to the real story, several years back, I want to say around 2005, we went on a family trip to Yosemite. Fairly standard trip, pretty falls, fun hikes for us kids. However, on the last day of the trip, as we're headed out of the park, we decide to stop by this pretty glade, with a small stream running through it. It was a bit off of the main road, and the side road that continued was covered in essentially a tunnel of trees. My parents were just relaxing, enjoying the view, and me and my brother are venturing deeper into the meadow. When my dad gets a gut-twisting, horrible feeling. He said that when he looked towards the tunnel of trees, it seemed to get a lot darker, and the trees twisted? Became distorted? At the very least, it was definitely not normal. My mom said that he began shouting at us to get in the car at that moment, and we all ran to the car. My dad drove the fuck away, but he says that he saw the darkness following us, touching the back of the car briefly, near where my brother and I were seated. As we drove down the hill, my brother and I suddenly came down with really severe nosebleeds, and the next day we had pneumonia. My brother ended up having to go to the ER. I could have sworn I saw a black robes figure in the corner of my eye standing by my dying cancer grandmother's bed in hospice care. Shocked, I just stared at it and I noticed my grandmother was looking at it too. She only stopped staring at it when she saw me looking at it. She died that night. Another time was when I was in a potentially deadly motorcycle crash. Was launched over railing and fell at least 15 feet below after I already broke my ribs from the impact. Fell into a very almost man-sized large bush, saved my life. But as I was falling, I could have sworn I saw a transparent man in a 40s style suit with patches on the elbows watching in the woods. No one was really there. It was my dead grandfather's birthday, which fought in World War II and died in the 70s before I was born due to cancer. But I didn't know that until my dad mentioned it would have been his birthday. Also, this one time where the TV channel changed 116 channels away from what it was on. The only remote was on the TV in front of everyone while we were chatting. It was competitive swimming. Me and my brother both were competitive swimmers. This had to have been about 2 years ago during the summer. I had this dream that I was in this old-timey train station, and I was standing next to this man wearing a brown trench coat and one of those fedoras reporters used to wear. The man then turned to me and said, "I'm going to pick up your Uncle Bud. Don't worry about him, he's going to be just fine." As the man turned away, the train pulled up and the man walked on. I woke up from the dream as soon as the train pulled out of the station. When I woke up, it was about 1 in the morning. The next morning I get the news that my great Uncle Bud died in the night around 1 a.m. I immediately told my parents about the dream. After describing the man in the station, my dad shockingly exclaimed that he knew for a fact that the man in my dream was his dad, who had passed years before I was born. According to my father, his dad wore the same brown trench coat and hat, and it made sense that his dad picked up Uncle Bud because they used to be really good friends. I remember at that time being really shaky on my beliefs of the paranormal, and sometimes I still am, but I truly cannot explain that. When I was 8.5-ish, my friend and I liked to go push biking a lot. We lived in a small country town, so we're pretty much given free rein to just disappear for the day. It was a weekend, and as we were riding up the crest of a small hill that overlooked a valley in the town, I started to get this deeply uneasy feeling. We stopped at the top. From where we were, we looked out over the valley and directly at the next hill, because Australia really just has bumps, which is where our primary school was. The bottom of the hill was the bottom of the school, and it was the road where all the parents picked up their kids. As I'm looking out over the valley, enjoying the sunshine and the breeze, movement catches my eye. I look back at the school, and I freeze in terror as I watch one car go careening into a car pulled up on the side. I see the two cars smash and crumple up, I can hear the crackle of breaking glass, the rattling thump of the impact, and I know with a bone-deep, terrifying certainty, that my other close friend, her sister and mom are in there. And that they're dead, and my friend is going to be left all alone. This was an unshaking fact in my mind as I stared at the accident. I didn't question how I could so clearly hear the screams of the onlookers, the screech of tearing metal, or the ozone stink of hot metal. Even though I was too far away to even be able to hear anything somehow, I was getting sensory overload, like I was right there. My best friend asked me what was wrong. I'm shaking and crying at this point, so I manage stutter and somehow to get across what I've seen. She's puzzled, so my attention focuses back to her as she explains that there is nothing wrong. What am I freaking out about? So I look back, still horrified, and there's nothing there. Everything is still, quiet and calm. A week later, in exactly the same spot, my friend was in a devastating accident. Her mom was picking her and her older sister up from school when someone lost control of their car and smashed into them. The mother and sister died on impact, and my friend was hospitalized for months afterwards. I felt horrifically guilty for years afterwards. I should have told someone, anyone, what I saw, but it was so strange and unnerving that I just tried to forget about it instead. There's a lady that my mom has often seen doing questionable things in our street. I was walking to the shops with my mom and she pointed out said lady, who was standing outside the shopping center, to show me who she is. I was just like, oh okay, and we kept walking inside and left this lady still chatting to another person outside. There is only one entrance to this small shopping mall. We walk into the store and pick up a trolley, only to see this exact same lady now at the front of the long queue with groceries, waiting to pay. Same person, same clothing, same everything. To this day we still cannot begin to fathom how she got past us and did her shopping in basically less than 2 minutes when we left her standing outside, and we're both sure as hell she didn't pass us in that space of time. My story is placed in Mexico and happened to my grandmother. I met my paternal grandmother twice because she lived in Mexico, but I heard this from my dad and then confirmed by her when we visited. Well, the story goes that my grandfather was supposed to come home early, 8 p.m. to help her empty a heavy water basin she needed to wash clothes in, by hand, at night, so when she hangs the clothes sun won't fade colors. Well, Grandpa goes to the bar down the street instead and Grandma was left to do the heavy lifting alone. She is pissed at this point and began cussing up a storm directed at my grandfather. Still not home by 2 a.m., she said she was cursing aloud because that's how angry she was. Well, their house is located on the corner of their property, maybe 3 city blocks of fields. So she is cursing my grandpa out when she sees a man approaching in the distance who she assumes is my granddad, but as he gets closer she said he somehow started morphing between a huge black dog and a man. 1 second there is a dog and 1 second there is a man, and is starting to get close fast, so she runs inside and latches the doors with the metal bar. There is no knobs or keyholes, just a thick metal that blocks the door from opening, and the windows are these metal little doors that have the bar that goes in a hole in the wall. Well, she literally sees the metal slide out of the hole and the window swings open, and on the other side there is a handsome man asking if she needed help with the ugliest/prettiest smile. Well, my grandma wasn't about to fall for it and instantly replies, "Go back to hell, Satan," and slams the window. She begins praying until she hears banging on the door, which is now my grandpa trying to get in the house. She immediately lets him in and tells him what happened, which he thinks is pretty funny considering she was cussing him out. However, his tune changed the next day when outside the window where the man was standing there is a mess of huge paw prints in the soft dirt. And against the wall on the sides, the window high up on the wall. They got a white magic witch to check out their house, and she was like, "Fuck that, y'all need a priest for this," so they got a priest who blessed their house and whatnot. I always heard this story in Spanish, which I think makes it way scarier, but there you go, people. I was a kid at the time. Around 10. In the neighborhood, there was a very small house stuck between 2 others, with a minuscule outside garden, a single window on the first floor, and with a single inhabitant, a man who, to put it mildly, would give Jack Nicholson's character in As Good as It Gets a run for his money and jerkass. And then the man died alone in his sleep. He was found 2 weeks later when the local shop noticed his absence. To explain that he wasn't loved would be an understatement. His sons and only family, both influential and wealthy engineers, one is a high-ranking official in the government electricity company, the other the city engineer of an entire district, brawled over his coffin for his meager inheritance, sealed the house's door with chains and a lock, and left to get lawyers to help them secure the better deal. One day, while I was playing tag with the other kids, we were running past the house when one of us stopped. "Hey guy, there's light inside the abandoned house." "Stop talking, bull, there's nobody." He's right. We were clearly seeing it. A small, flickering light, like a candle's, coming from inside. We had a string of thieving in the neighborhood at the time and everyone was on edge, so we called our parents believing it might well be the actual hideout of said thieves. Soon, after noticing that we weren't joking, one of the adults came back with tools and started cutting the locks. As soon as the lock got cut, the light stopped. The adults came in, looked around, found nothing. Beside a really strong smell of decomposition they attributed to how the dude died. They sent us on our way, thinking it was a visual trick caused by the red curtains put on said window. But the light didn't stop and came back multiple times. The brothers were called. The electricity engine showed up first and, influenced by his craft, thought there might be an electrical dysfunction. Nothing. They combed the area looking for a tunnel. Nothing. The entrance to the roof was sealed from the outside, and the iron bars put on the windows were not bothered at all. With his research being unsuccessful and the outside entrance definitely confirmed as the sole entrance, he chalked it to the curtains like the other adults, took them off, and left with them. Then the second brother showed up. Cried foul and thievery for the silk curtains, and in response, sealed the front door with concrete, making entrance impossible. Yet the light stayed. Always starting at around 18 to cease at around 21. It stopped about a month later, when both brothers agreed they were acting like twats and made peace. A while back I was hanging out in the local park/forest with 3 other friends. We went quite far into the forest and it was getting dark when we picked a spot to stay for a little while. We kept teasing each other with basic imagery of things you wouldn't want to come across while sitting in the middle of the woods during dark, like creepypastas and such. All of a sudden one of us pointed to the right saying there's a person walking towards us. We thought he was kidding, but once we all looked to the right there was this woman walking up to us looking like a figure from your typical horror film. I don't mean any of this in an offensive way. She was quite tall and very pale, wearing a short black dress and heels, with her Johnny Greenwood-style black hair hanging in front of her eyes. Out of courtesy I said good evening, which triggered a conversation. She stared at all of us individually with quite a lost look in her eyes when she proceeded to say in a voice that resembled one of a tired child, "Have you guys seen any deer yet?" We told her we hadn't. "I meant roe deers," she said while looking behind us. I told her we had neither, and since I noticed my friends and myself were becoming slightly uncomfortable, I told her we'd go looking for them and I wished her a good evening once more. She kept staring behind us for a bit longer and then she left without saying a word. After freaking out over this unusual appearance for a bit, we decided to head to the entrance of the forest. We saw the lady walking back in the direction she came from when we cycled by. We were hyping the situation while cycling back, and when we were nearing the entrance, we saw a figure walking towards the entrance as well. I jokingly said the figure is the lady, since she was walking on high heels and we were cycling, thinking it wouldn't be likely for her to be any quicker than us, and once we came closer it appeared to be actually her. She moved her hair away from her eyes and looked directly at me, probably since I was cycling in front, and she said, "I've stumbled across 4 roe deers already, back there, in the forest." I nodded and we cycled our way out of the woods. The thing that freaks us out is the fact that she stated she had seen 4 roe deer within the time span of plus or minus 10 minutes, and the 4 of us were out in the forest when she saw us. It's not that scary of a story, but it's one that freaked me out quite a bit. My mom has the best paranormal ghost experience that I've heard recounted to me, that is impossible for me to find a believable rational explanation for. She's Kate. It happened when she was on holiday with her parents. They were on their way to Devon from Suffolk. This journey took a long time and required an overnight stop. She was around 14 years old at the time, very precocious and willful, but enjoying the prospect of a small holiday with her mom and dad. They arrive at a hotel for the overnight stop, and Kate goes to relax for a bit in the TV alcove they have upstairs while her parents go for a drink at the bar. Happily watching TV, she's surprised to see a man poking his head into the alcove, and the only way she can describe how he looks is he had very old skin. Despite being startled, she apologizes and offers the use of the TV to the man, who just stares back at her blankly, and then leaves just as suddenly as he arrived. Kate is a little freaked out by this, and upon reuniting with her parents before getting to their rooms for the night, she remembers telling them about the man, hoping she hadn't upset anyone. She expected "Oh, that's probably the man in room 3, but instead they seemed confused and perturbed, to use Kate's words. Kate has a room to herself, so says goodnight to her parents and goes to bed. Once in bed, Kate starts to read her book. She's been reading in bed since she could read, and usually falls asleep to this day with a book in her hand, fully enveloped in the story, when the strangest thing happens. I'm going to use the words she used when she first told me this story. "I felt a man walk through the wall behind me to my left. I was so scared that I immediately hid under my bed covers and shut my eyes as hard as I could and wished for him to go away. I felt him slowly walk down the left side of my bed, around the end of the bed, and continued in that direction until he went through the wall facing the right side of my bed. When she couldn't feel him anymore, she came out from under the covers, and decided that she must be going mad, letting her imagination get away from her. To this day she is a very pragmatic, skeptical person, so she thought it was in her head and that was the end of it. Fast forward to 10 to 14 years later and she's having dinner with her parents, which isn't a regular occurrence as she's moved to London, where she would meet my dad and later have me, but her parents still live in Suffolk. They are talking about weird experiences they've had or their friends have had, and my mum remembers this experience, leading with "I got myself all worked up in that hotel we stayed at thinking someone walked through the wall." Once her mum hears this, however, she goes white and has a very serious look on her face. She explains that she had exactly the same experience. Upon discussing the night further, they work out the wall the thing walked through from my mum's room was the wall straight into her parents' room. This incident has been dubbed the thing that jumped the fence by my friends and I who were there that night. So my friends and I were really into airsoft/paintball when we were in our teens. One night, during the middle of winter, we were at our friend Sean's house. After shooting at each other all day, we had jumped into the hot tub and were talking about nothing in particular. Sean's family owned a pretty decent sized piece of land. Their backyard was huge and in the back left corner, they had their dog's kennel where their dog would sleep at night. They had installed a DIY streetlight near the kennel so they could keep an eye on the dog. Anyways, as we are hanging out in the jacuzzi, we hear his dog start barking insanely. All of us quiet down and stare. Something vaulted over the fence in the back with ease. This fence was a 8 feet wooden fence, and behind it was a huge ditch that dropped probably a good 5 feet. When I say this thing vaulted, I mean it was a human-shaped thing that used one hand to grab onto the top of the fence and throw the rest of itself over with ease. It then dodged the DIY streetlight and disappeared out of sight. Every single one of us saw it and screamed. Followed by us scrambling out of the hot tub, falling down, and finally getting inside to Sean's parents asking us why we were freaked out. Sean's dad grabbed his gun, and we all grabbed our paintball guns going out there to check. Sean was worried about his dog, so we all went out and found the dog out of the kennel. As we got closer to the kennel, it got deathly quiet. At the kennel, the front door of the cage had been bent in half. The top half of the cage door was bent downwards and inwards, which looked like something from the outside pushed the top half down with ease. Sean's dad told us all to go inside and we brought the dog in with us. Early the next morning, a friend and I woke up just as the sun came up and we decided to go check if we could find any tracks in the snow behind the fence. We went back there, basically hugging the fence between the edge of the ditch and the fence. We found paw prints of something that looked like a cat. Everyone swears though that the thing that jumped over the fence had a human silhouette. My boyfriend and I enjoy camping during the summer, and although I do enjoy it, my boyfriend is much more into it than I am, and we typically hike deeper into the woods from our designated camping spot so we're further away from other campers. A couple years ago we traveled a couple hours out from CO Springs, we lived in Denver at the time, to go camping in an area I can't recall the name of. I remember we had arrived Saturday and most of the good camping spots were already taken, so we were left with the last vacant space that was unsheltered and fairly close to the road. We decided to travel further into the woods to find a more private area to set up camp. After scouting for the perfect spot, we decided on an area that was roughly 50 to 60 feet from the original spot and began making ourselves acquainted. We spent the night like any other night we would camping, pitching our tent, starting a fire, cooking, drinking beer, etc. It was pretty dark when I had decided I need to piddle, so my boyfriend lent me his headlight so I could find a spot deeper in the woods. After stepping over piles of branches, rocks and other debris, I found a spot to do my business. I don't remember when exactly I had noticed it, but I eventually began looking at my surroundings, noticing random articles of clothing. I investigated further and can recall seeing multiple items of clothing, shoes, rubber gloves and black plastic trash bags. There was also what looked like remnants of a tent. It was all fairly dirty, so it must have been there for quite some time. What really struck me as odd was all of it was in what I would describe as a pit-like formation in the rocks, not a typical place you would try and pitch a tent. I ended up going back to our campsite to retrieve my boyfriend so I could show him what I had stumbled upon. It really freaked both of us out. We ended up taking pictures of it the next day and trying to call one of the phone numbers that was posted near the campsite entrance, but the line was disconnected. Anyway, it really flipped it out because we couldn't think of any explanation as to why someone would just dump their belongings there so far out into the woods. Especially finding the rubber gloves, clothing and trash bags. Did we stumble upon evidence someone tried to conceal? Still freaks me out to this day. I have a few. All of them happened over the years growing up in a somewhat rural coastal community in Nova Scotia. The biggest one that comes to mind is all teenagers at my buddy's house partying, music, drinking beer and etc. I was sitting at the kitchen table with some people and he was out smoking on the deck with some others. Everyone was in that area, no one was in the rest of the house. Suddenly a loud crash and he coming running in, expecting one of his friends broke something. His parents had a lot of china and silver and generally breakable collectibles. We all jump up explaining we hadn't touched anything as we go to inspect. There were probably 20 to 24 pictures lining the staircase the whole way up, some of old relatives, others of miscellaneous things in old wooden frames. Every one of them had fallen off the wall and toppled in a pile on the tile at the bottom of the stairs. But none of the glass broke. This story is probably me misremembering quite a bit, since I've always had a lot of trouble recalling minutiae. One night, if I recall it was just prior to midterms starting in my freshman year of high school, I was attacked by something that came into my room through the window. The window screen had been shredded and snow had fallen in, so it was safe to assume that was the entry point. I woke up, probably sometime around 1 a.m., to see something lying on the floor. It was too dark to see anything as it was still snowing outside and the moon was blocked from sight, so when I panicked and tried to get out of bed, it jumped at me. Got a couple of nasty scratches but ultimately it left. The door to my room was locked so it obviously couldn't go anywhere. Honestly, I thought I imagined it or that it was a nightmare since I had been having night terrors and it was in fact in close proximity to midterm, so I was super stressed anyways, but the scratches on my arms were very real. My friends never believed me and my parents claim it was the cat, but the fact remains that we had to replace the screen on the window. When my uncle was born, my uncle had some kind of liver problem that caused him to become extremely jaundiced and ill. After several stays at the closest hospital, she was told that he was finally out of the woods with his issue. She'd become extremely protective of him, as you do, and that same night she took my uncle to bed with her to keep a close eye on him. She woke up sometime in the night and saw a figure in the doorway. This confused her for a few reasons. At the time there was no one else living there aside from her husband, my uncle and herself. No one else should be there. Her immediate thought was that someone had broken in, but something wasn't quite right about this person. During this time on the mountain, some 40 years ago, there wasn't much else in the way of lighting aside from what was indoors, and all those lights were off. Yet she could see the outline of this person against the darkness, and she realized it was because he was darker than the night itself. Paralyzed in fear, she could only watch as the figure ambled its way towards the bed. She tried to call out to her husband or move, but her body wouldn't respond. The figure laid a hand on my uncle, who was cradled in the crook of her arm, and leaned over him. While she couldn't see its eyes, she had the sense that it was shifting its attention from him then to her, pausing each time rather pointedly. The figure did this repeatedly before it abruptly stood straight and shambled its way out of the door, disappearing into the dark living room. Suddenly able to move, she sat straight up and screamed for her husband, and when they had turned on the lights they discovered that my uncle's jaundice had returned. They took him to the hospital immediately. Had she not been woken up by whatever that figure was, he could have died. I was on a road trip to the Oregon coast with my girlfriend at the time, who is now my ex-wife, thankfully. Anyways, we decided to meander on our way and took a random valley to the coast on the Washington side of the Columbia River. While driving through the valley we had a pretty eerie feeling, but it didn't matter. We were exploring, and decided to stop at an abandoned farmhouse which was overgrown with blackberry bushes. The farmhouse was also feet from an old light rail which ran the valley, and had a large porch like a train stop in the front. So maybe it was a rural train station at one point, IDK. Anyways, we started walking around. My ex-wife girlfriend at the time said she was kind of scared. I wrote it off as her being a chick and scared. My ex was also recording everything with our camcorder. I walked to the side of the farmhouse and there was a mushroom circle. I walked to the middle of the circle and knelt down to look at the mushrooms. Back to this later. My ex was filming and said she maybe wanted to go because she thought she was seeing weird stuff. I went inside the farmhouse because why not? It was interesting in a historical way. Fast forward about 2 weeks and we're home and going over our vacation footage. It's late at night and at the part where we are at the farmhouse. So the video is from my ex's perspective because she was filming. So while I'm exploring, she is on the railroad and filming. She says to herself, "What's that?" and zooms in down the railroad. The camera is fuzzy but focuses in on several whitish blobs of smoke floating about like flies do, but they are the size of basketballs. Just smoky blobs flying around and disappearing and reappearing. That's when she zooms out and says to me she is scared and maybe wants to go. She says, "Babe?" And the camera pans over to this green grassy area under an old tree in a mushroom circle. She zooms in the spot where my voice is coming from but am not visible. She says, "Come on Jacob, I want to go, where are you?" Suddenly in the video I appear out of nothing standing up from a knelt position in the mushroom circle. Weird, right? Then she pans the camera across the farmhouse and back to me. In the video I say I'm going to look inside. She says, "Okay." Nervously. While I'm gone on camera she is simply recording the farmhouse in all its dilapidated, rotting glory. It's a 2-story with a large covered porch and tall windows with no glass left in them. On the video, in the downstairs window is a dark silhouette of a human staring. I am getting such chills right now, BTW. So the camera pans to the upstairs windows, and there is another human form peeking around the edge of the window on the left of the house. It's smoky and see-through. She walks with the camera to the side and there is another form in that window as well, full on in the middle, smoky and in the shape of a person but faceless. She doesn't say anything and didn't see the forms at the time but is clearly freaked out by how she has been acting. So I am freaked out at my house looking at this video. But am critical, so I pause the video and rewind it to watch it again. This time I put the video on half speed to analyze it closer, but it also puts the audio at half speed. During the video, after I walk out of frame into the house and all our talking stops, I hear at half speed what sounds like normal human whispers at regular speed, all while the video audio is half speed. These whispers sound normal and regular speed. I rewind the tape and drop the speed again a notch, and turn the volume up. On camera my ex's voice is very slow and deep as is mine, which is normal for slowed audio. When our voices stop but the video continues, the whispers start and now are more audible. The video is slowly moving across the farmhouse and there are ghostly forms in the windows, and what sounds like 2 or 3 men whispering amongst each other. As the video and the whispering increase to the last window and the full form ghost, there is a crystal clear voice rise from the whispering. It says as the video blurs as it pans, "Form reflect behind you." I stop the video completely freaked out and rush to wake my ex up. Strange stuff. My friend and I were both hanging out at her house, having a sleepover, as teenagers. She had warned me before I came over that her house might be haunted. There were some past instances she had already described, like the time her and her other friend were finding snacks in the kitchen around 3 a.m. and the overhead lights started to flicker on and off. They got creeped out and rushed to her bedroom, shutting the door. While they tried to shake off the feeling, they heard footsteps going down the stairs which were across the living room from her door. They managed to get to sleep, but when they left the room in the morning, their shoes were sitting right outside her door, when they had left them by the front door that night. I enjoy a good ghost story, but I'm pretty skeptical usually. I brushed it off as her trying to scare me right before I slept over. I got my own experience that night. We fell asleep in her bed, watching a VHS, and I woke up to the sound of the tape rewinding. The light from the TV was washing everything in blue light. I was facing toward the wall and suddenly got that lizard brain, all hair standing straight up, feeling that something was off. Silhouetted on the wall was a shadow of what seemed to be a curvy woman with shoulder-length, curly hair. Her stance was cartoonish, the classic praying mantis creeping pose. The shadow kind of lurched across the wall, getting bigger and less distinct as it got closer to me. At the time, it felt like everything was happening in slow motion. I could barely breath. I was preparing to scream and, all of a sudden, the tape stopped rewinding and made a loud clack sound and the screen went from blue to black. The overwhelming, paralyzing fear dissipated and was replaced with a more manageable state of terror and then the need to wake my friend and tell her what happened. She was pretty nonchalant about the whole thing. She told me not to worry about it and go to sleep. The ghost wouldn't hurt us. Needless to say, I did not listen and stayed up the whole night with heart palpitations. I'm in the car with my mom on a family holiday. Somewhere south coast of England like Devon or Cornwall. We traveled there a lot. It's a quiet road with fields of wheat on one side and green field, ocean on the other. I look out to see a black cat in the wheat field. The more I look at this cat, the more my brain feels like it's struggling to work something out. Something is wrong with this black cat. It's like my eyes and brain are shooting messages to each other. How far is this cat and what size is it really? Like the perspective I was seeing was wrong, as this cat was much bigger than it should have been from how far it was from us. I think maybe it's just a big dog, but the tail is long like a cat's. I turned to my mom, but I decided to say nothing. My dad and sisters love weird stuff like this, but not my mom. She's a little too serious for things like I think I just saw a large wild predator. So I keep it to myself. When we pass and get back to the camping ground, my mom turns to me and says in a way like she thinks she's going mad, "Did you see that giant cat earlier?" I tell her everything I saw, and what she saw matches with what she saw. Later back at home we find out the area does have sightings of big cats like this. They are believed to be released exotic pets, but no one's been able to get a good enough evidence to prove they are living there. Just a bunch of witnesses like me and my mom. When I was in college, I worked as a caretaker at a crisis nursery that was founded by an older woman who had passed away some years earlier. We'll call her Mary. We would watch kids for days or sometimes weeks while their parents took care of emergency situations. The nursery was built like a house with a kitchen, playroom, and bedrooms to help the kids feel more at home during their stay. I worked the evening shift, so part of my job was helping the kids get ready for bed and doing bed checks, making sure the kids were sleeping and safe about every 15 minutes, until the overnight shift came. The bedrooms had security cameras, and the display for these cameras was a large TV mounted in the hallway where all of us caretakers congregated after the kiddos had gone to bed. When there were a lot of children staying in the house, this made it easier to keep track of everyone and make sure they were okay. Every so often, some creepy shit would happen in the late hours of the night. We'd see rocking chairs in the nursery rooms move by themselves, like someone was sitting there with the babies while they slept. The light-up/musical toys in the playroom would start going off by themselves. We would always joke that it was Mary's ghost messing with us, but there were always logical explanations for what happened. But one night, there was a child staying at the house. She was about 9 years old. Typically the kids share rooms, but we had so many children at the time that she had been placed in one of the extra rooms by herself. Now, keep in mind, when parents drop their kids off at this place, they had to give a health history. I would hope that if this kid had experienced night terrors or sleep paralysis, her mom would have informed us. So it's getting close to the end of my shift, about 10:30 or so, and all of a sudden we hear screaming and crying from this girl's room. She had been sleeping soundly 15 minutes prior. We immediately look up at the security camera screen and see her racing from her bed, out the door, and down the hallway towards us. We meet her halfway and see that she's sweating profusely and trembling. Her eyes are full of terror. We get her a blanket, a glass of water, tell her to come sit with us and talk about what happened. She stumbles over her words but finally gets out, "The woman on the ceiling, the old woman in the black dress, she came down and sat on my bed." Now, this sounds a little creepy, but we insisted she'd had a bad dream. We let her sit with us until she fell asleep again. One of my coworkers whispers it was Mary, while pointing towards the girl's room, and we all have a nice chuckle about it. The next day, there was an article in the local newspaper about the history of the nursery, telling the story of Mary's life and why she built it. The picture featured was of her before her death. It was the first time any of us working my shift had seen a picture of her. She was wearing a black dress. I know there are so many logical explanations for this story, but to this day always gives me goosebumps. I'd like to think Mary stuck around and just wants to make sure the kids are safe and taken care of. I used to deliver pizza, and one time I was delivering dinner to a middle-aged man that had never ordered from us before. This was approximately 5 years into my employment, so I knew the regulars and even the semi-regulars. Nothing out of the ordinary upon arrival other than the man was waiting outside when I arrived. This happens on occasion, and is a welcome sight since it saves me time. The man wore jeans, a dark t-shirt, a baseball cap, and covered in stains. From my experience in delivering to auto shops, he was a mechanic by trade. He signs the credit card slip, then casually points back to my car, and says, "Oops, looks like you got a headlight out." As I turn to look, it turns back on. I look back at the man and he lowers his arms. Casually, and with a smirk, he says, "Would you look at that?" Then turns to enter his house. Not another word was spoken. I am 99% sure that man was a wizard. I was laying in bed around midnight and I heard a knock on my bedroom door. I called out to whoever was knocking to give me a second. I sleep with my bedroom door locked. I got up and opened the door. No one was there. Got back into bed and I could hear the floor creaking outside my door. Then I hear another loud knock on my door. I get up and slowly walk towards the door. I quickly open it and again nobody there. I decide it must be my stepdad playing a joke on me, so I look around the upstairs. My brother was asleep in bed snoring. The bathroom outside my room was empty. Nobody on the upstairs landing. Lights are off downstairs and I can't see anyone when I look over the railing upstairs. Decide it must be my mind playing tricks on me and go back to bed. I get covered up and hear the creaking of the floorboards outside my door again and another loud knock. I know that it can't be my stepdad because I just checked every spot upstairs and he wouldn't have had time to run from downstairs and get to my door that quickly. I'm still trying to trick myself into believing I was imagining things when there's another knock. This time both my cats jump off the bed and run towards the door, meowing, and the hair on their backs is standing up. I decided that I wasn't imagining it, and I covered my head with the blankets and decided to just ignore it. I told my parents the next morning and both were freaked out. My mom swears we have ghosts in our house because my stepdad has told us he has heard that our neighborhood was built near / possibly on a Native American graveyard. Like a lot of little turds between the ages of 8 to 10 years, I had an aversion to the darkness that seemed to invite itself into our house every evening, and had it not been for this one particular evening I would have chalked this aversion up to nuts and their lack of droppage, but no, not that night. That night in particular I awoke from my slumber disturbed ever so slightly at first until I could adjust my eyes to my surroundings. From thence I immediately noticed this room was not the room that I recalled myself laying down, for bed in, as I was now in the bathroom lying on the floor in the fetal position. How in the hell I got there I have no clue, but now that I'm older I'm able to include rational ideas as to how I may have ended up where I did, such as sleepwalking / narcolepsy / being dankly pranked, and all of which are quite plausible explanations, except none of that stuff was / is / never has been noted in our household. And yeah, I know there's a first time for everything, but what still boggles me about this is my bedroom was on the second floor of our house and the furthest away from the first floor bathroom where I found myself in. Unless for one night only somehow I became spooter fucking them, there's no way I made it there of my own cognizance without alerting others in the house. One night I had just gotten home and the door was locked. I thought my mother was home and for some reason my key wouldn't work. I thought it was just jammed and I started jiggling it and calling my mom to unlock the door. The doorknob then started jiggling like someone was trying to open it from the inside and then stopped. It lasted for a couple of seconds. I thought it was my mom letting me in. I went to open the door and it was locked. I was kind of aggravated and then it happened again. I was like, why wouldn't she let me in? Finally, I unlocked the door. I had the wrong key. It was dark, and I sarcastically made the comment, "Thanks Mom," when I walked through the door. The lights were out in the kitchen, but I began walking around and noticed no one was home as all the other lights were out. That's when I became so terrified. No one was there. I'm not sure what happened, but it definitely did and made me feel uneasy. Also, I live in an older house that we remodeled before moving in. We have had creepy things happen, like the phone ring at 2 a.m. and no one is calling, or our own phone number / name would show up on the caller ID. We also hear bumps. But my family, and friends who have witnessed the phone calls, all joke about the man in the attic when something goes missing or we hear a noise. Whatever happened that night felt different than all the other spooky stuff, and I was legitimately terrified. It's always in the back of my mind and I try not to stay home alone at night.